Hello, this is Dr. RoboCoach with a cheat sheet review for 2024. I'll be looking at DraftSharks today. They're one of the top cheat sheet software. In this particular case, we're not talking just about cheat sheets. They have a War Room, which is an application which uses their underlying cheat sheet to do some more sophisticated things. One of which is to recalculate player values live during the draft.
First, let's take a step back, go down memory lane. I remember my first fantasy football draft. I went on the internet and I downloaded a cheat sheet, printed it off. It was hideous. But what I did is I marked players off through the draft. At the end of the draft, I realized I downloaded a sheet for PPR and I was in a standard league. Don't do that. So what I'm describing here is a cheat sheet. The Draft War Room is a cheat sheet, but on steroids. So what we're doing is we're looking at not generic rankings that are static. The Draft War Room will actually calculate the value of a player, each player, during your fantasy draft. So that player value will change during the draft in real time.
So Alex is saying that the value of a player changes during the draft, and this is essentially false. So I don't know why he said that. The value of a player is based upon VBD, value-based drafting. So they use VBD, and so if you're in a 10-team league, 10 quarterbacks will be taken, and the value of those 10 quarterbacks is based upon the baseline player. Well, the baseline player, the values of those quarterbacks don't change unless the value of the baseline player changes. So that could happen if one team drafted 2 of the top 10 quarterbacks, and suddenly your baseline player would be the 11th quarterback. So hypothetically, that could have a influence on the value of a player during the draft because now your baseline is shifted down one. However, once you get down to the 11th quarterback, we're talking about value differences that are so small that it's not even worth mentioning, much less designing software that would recalculate that on the fly. So that feature that they have is essentially worthless. You shouldn't ever consider recalculating player values, DVDs in the middle of your draft. That would be a waste of time. So what is important here is everything else that goes into their predictions. Their predictions will determine how good their software is. It's basically going to boil down to what they've listed here. They describe 17 crucial value indicators in any fantasy football league. And that's a lot. I have grading rules for cheat sheets. So here are my grading rules for cheat sheets. Pretty simple. Values should have tier-based player values. So in other words, if a player is valued at 100 and another player is valued at 101, you don't say the player who's at 101 is better than the 100 player. They're in the same tier, the same cluster of players. 2, hot and cold. Points today are worth more than points tomorrow. Customize player forecasts, so that's going to be based upon your league setup. This is basically VBD. So PPR is going to be one influence on your league, whether you have a half-point PPR, a full-point PPR, no PPR, whether it's a standard league, whether it's a touchdown-only league. This all goes into determining the player values will be, and that's going to roll up into the 4th one, which is the VBD, value-based drafting. So that is determined by the baseline player that we discussed. Custom ADP, so I mentioned you want ADPs for your league setup. So if you're in a half-point PPR, you want a half-point PPR ADP. If you're in a standard league or a touchdown-only league, you want an ADP for that type of league. Customized studs and duds, so that's basically based upon those 2 things, ADP and VBD. Now you've got studs and duds. Some players are going to be ranked way higher than what the ADP would say they're ranked at. A WUP would be the wait until pick. So if you got a sleeper, you can wait on that player. You want to see that. And then the 8th thing is the updated draft chart. You want injury adjustments as well. So if they think a player is only going to last maybe 8 to 10 games in the season, then that should be part of their prediction. Alternatively, if they think a player is only going to start 4 or 5 games, then that should be part of their prediction. They should surface that information, or they should at least say it's part of their prediction number, the number that they're going to assign to a player at the end. So there are the 8 rules to grading a cheat sheet. They've got 17 things. So what I suspect is that these things, they're repeating things. And I think that's the case. So league scoring, positional value, those are the same thing. That's VBD. So they're saying that they do VBD. That's good. 3D projections, that's basically saying that a player has a high and a low, and that's really not much value to you. There's no need for that information. If you try to use it during a draft, how would you even use that? They talk about it in their video, but it seems like a fudge factor. If you want their 3D projections to go on the high side, then you turn a dial and they go towards the high side. I don't know. That's like putting salt and pepper on a person's table. Let them salt and pepper their own projections. I guess that's fine. But if you go to a fine restaurant, you'll notice there's not salt and pepper on the tables because the chef has already salted and peppered everything and he doesn't want you to mess it up. Okay, setting the baseline. Again, this is just VBD. They don't need to talk about. So all these things have been VBD. Real-time needs, when to fill each position. This is, okay, now we're starting to talk about a WUP, when wait until pick. That's important. I want to see that, so that's good. I'm glad that they have that in there. Opponent team needs. This may affect your strategy again. If your opponent's, back to the analogy I gave you before, if a player takes two of the top 10 quarterbacks, that doesn't really help them. If it's a 1 quarterback league, they can only start 1. It does affect the baseline player. It moves it down to the 11th player. But like I said, it's at that level, it doesn't matter. All the players are about the same. So the values don't change. Positional scarcity, right. So again, this is a repeat of number 6. Doesn't really matter. If somebody wants to draft 3 of the top QBs, it doesn't really shift the baseline that much, and it's only going to make it harder for that team to win. I would encourage my opponents to draft in that way. It's going to make it easier for me. Injury risk. Okay, this is what I mentioned. You want to know that the projections involve propensity for injury. So if a player is likely to only play 8 games because of injuries, then you want that to be rolled up in the projection. I listened to the video here and it sounds like that's the case. But then they will direct you to say, hey, look at our War Room player card. So you look at the player card and it says this player has an injury risk. Is that in your projection or not? So that's bad advice. If you tell somebody, hey, go look at before you draft them, go look at their injury propensity, they might double count it. If you've already made it in your projection, if you've already downgraded a player because of their risk of injury, and then you tell a person using your software to go and look at the player card and see if there's a risk of injury, then it's being double counted. So that's bad advice. And they need to say exactly, is it being factored in or is it not? And it would also be, if it is being factored in, that's great. But how are you factoring it in? Very few people know an algorithm to judge injury propensity. Let's hear yours. Has it been tested anywhere? Is it any good? Does anybody else use it? At FantasyFootballDraft.com, we have an injury propensity calculation that is tested, through white papers and people who do that sort of analysis, and we use it in our evaluations. Did they do the same? I don't know. They don't say. Breakout potential. Okay. This, who knows? Every year I hear about breakout potential. This is another, the old maxim that, second year wide receivers, that's when they break out. Do they? Has anybody done the math? And tell me exactly, is it rolled into your projections or not? Or is this going to be something I look on the player card for like some little thing that says breakout potential? And then if I see it on the player card, should I increase your projection or not? Is it rolled into your projection or not? They don't say. I assume it is because they've listed it here in their 17 things, but I don't know. And if they do, how they should explain, unless it's a proprietary algorithm they have, how do you factor in breakout potential? What scientific basis, what mathematical basis do you have to predict breakout potential? Because I'm sure people would like to know that, especially coaches and scouts. They would really like to know that. The thing is, though, is that no such number exists, at least not to my knowledge. Correlated ADP. Okay, this is a good one. You want this. So if your ADP is for PPR, that's great if you're a PPR league, but not so great if you're in TD only league. So yeah, you definitely want number 10 here. Bye week conflicts. This says no place here. If you're incorporating bye weeks into your cheat sheet, then that's the last thing on a list of 100 that you should be considering when looking at a cheat sheet. Flex options. Again, this is part of VBD. Doesn't need to be set up in a separate, like number 12, we include flex options. Bench depth. Yeah, you do want to have bench depth, but how does that affect value calculations? You're just doesn't seem to have any factor at all on your calculations. Trust factor. This is another one they mentioned. It just seems like they use Anthony Richardson as a example, and they said, how much do you trust him? And it's going to be incorporated into their predictions. And it's like, it's just a fudge factor. Somebody says, I trust this guy. What mathematical basis, what proof do you have that you should trust this player more over that player? And if you do trust, if there is a mathematical basis, is it in your spreadsheet? Is it in your cheat sheet, the underlying values that you predicted or not? Personalized projection adjustments. Yep. So that's the salt and pepper that allows you to monkey around with the values of the players. Positional tiers. I mentioned this, I think, above. Isn't this the second time they mentioned tiers? Perhaps not. Okay, but you want tiers. Strength of schedule. That is also great. Probably should have been listed number 1 because a player's outcome every week will depend mostly on the opponent they're going to play. If they're playing a team with a high-scoring offense, then running backs are going to be used less. The game script is going to affect the player most. This is what I talk about when you look ahead. That's more important than looking at their historical performance. Looking at what's coming up. Yeah, sure, they've established baseline, they have a ceiling and a floor and stuff. But when you go to play another opponent, that's going to determine whether you're going to hit your ceiling and your floor. And I would hope that is incorporated in the player projections. But again, they don't really say that. They just say, they mention, well, 2 things. They go look at the player card and see what their strength of schedule is. And that will, help you during the draft in determining whether you should draft that guy. Well, is it part of the projection already? And if so, won't I then be double counting it? And that would be bad. You don't want to double count strength of schedule. That's a double whammy on a guy. And so there it is. All 17 things that go into making up the cheat sheet that underlies their software. Do they have tier? Yes. Do they have hot and cold? No, they don't. Points today or not. They didn't mention anything about points today being worth more than points tomorrow. Customized point forecasts. Yep, they mentioned that. They mentioned it like numerous times. They could have just said customized point forecast in one bullet. Customized VBD, yes. So that's going to incorporate your league setup. They have that. Custom ADP, yes, they have that. Custom studs and duds, they didn't say they have it, but if they have a custom VBD and an ADP, then you can calculate studs and duds. I don't know that they're going to surface that value for you, or that I don't know that they're going to highlight those players for you. And it'll probably come up when it suggests a player, because hopefully they won't suggest a sleeper, because if you can, sleepers by definition, you can wait for in later rounds. So if they recommend a player who's a sleeper and you get them in a round earlier than you had to, then they really haven't helped you out much. And they didn't mention anything about getting at this value. So I'd have to say maybe on the customized studs and duds. Wait until pick. It's not mentioned. So again, this is like, how long can I wait for that sleeper? Can I wait till the 5th round? Can I wait till the 6th round? I want to know when I have to wait until. Or will your software do that for me? They didn't say that. They did say they have injury adjustments, but again, they said, maybe not. Maybe you'll have to go to the player card, or maybe it's part of the projection, or maybe it's both. They didn't say. One of the other things that affects a player's value most is what the coach plans to do with them. So if the coach drafted somebody and it looks like the running back's only going to hold on to his starting position for half the year, what does your 17-week depth chart look like for that team? That's important. It wasn't mentioned. So how many players? They did mention that they say how many games they think a player will play, but only in relation to injuries. But what about in relation to the coach? I mean, a guy might get benched. So they didn't mention it. I don't know that it's in there. They do have a factor for how many games a player will play, but again, it only sounds like it's for injuries. All right, so to review, yes, no, yes, 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 no, no, no. So that's about 50%, and 50% is not too bad. I would say that gives them a big jump over ESPN and CBS and some other ones that I reviewed. So on a weighted scale, I would give that a B+. So this has been Dr. RoboCoach reviewing DraftSharks. And that's probably the highest grade I've given for a cheat sheet. So I would recommend giving this one a try. It seems pretty good in relation to the other ones. And good luck with your league this year, and go RoboCoach.